My people are a military people, male and female. My revenue is the proceeds of the sale of prisoners of war. All my nation, all are soldiers, and the slave trade feeds them. This is how a powerful West African ruler described his kingdom to a British soldier in the middle of the last century.
So this is how a powerful African ruler described his people to a British soldier. He said, my people are a warlike people. We basically live off the slave trade, and that's how we eat. All right.
It's no secret that European traders shipped roughly 11 million Africans to the New World from this very coast. This was the first European slave trading post in all of sub-Saharan Africa.
He's in Almina. That's what he's talking about.
Well, it feels very Mediterranean here. You can certainly feel the influence of the Portuguese and the Spanish. Powerful kingdoms whose rulers were happy to trade. Elmina was already a thriving market town, but it grew dramatically with the slave trade. I'm typical of African Americans of my generation. I'm obsessed with tracing my roots. For 200 years, many of my people had fantasies about coming back to Africa to live. Some actually did. We feel at home here because we're surrounded by black people. That's why we come.
You hear that? He said African Americans come back to Africa because they feel at home there because they're surrounded by black people. They're surrounded by dark-skinned people. That's why they come, to get away in a relief, in a change of atmosphere, in a change of culture from the culture of racism and the culture of prominent white supremacy in America.
But the memory of slavery and of what our ancestors must have gone through is always lurking. Even a pretty little harbor town like Elmina is dominated by its slave castle.
Housed between 150 and 200 women for 3 good months. This is where they slept, yes.
That's a slave
but the place
castle.
was much overcrowded. So there wasn't enough space for one even to lie down. The result was an outbreak of malaria and yellow fever. So by the time the ships arrived, more than half were already dead. Well, this is the infamous room of no return. That is also the door of no return. When the slaves got here, they never knew where they were going. Neither did they know what was going to happen to them. All they knew was to get out of this room onto the boats. Some actually committed suicide because that was the only way they thought they could get their freedom. In fact, it was the Africans who did the raiding and selling.
You hear that? He said, in fact, it was the Africans that did the raiding and selling. Let me repeat. Let me rewind that. Let me rewind that for you.
In fact, it was the Africans who did the raiding and selling.
It was the Africans that did the raiding and selling.
Of Africans to the Europeans. No European ever went into the hinterland to raid for slaves.
No European ever went into the hinterland to raid for slaves. They never went in there kidnapping for slaves. That was Africans. Now, this is the question. This is the $1 million question. Who was selling who and why? What people were being sold and who was not being sold? That's the $1 million question. Who was being sold and why was it being sold? We know that Africans were going in there to raid, kidnap, and whenever they fought different peoples, they'd take the prisoners of war and bring them to the Europeans also. But what people? We know for a fact that Ghana was one of the African kingdoms or nations that was doing it. We know Dahomey was also one of them. We know the port of Senegambians was also a part of that. Taking the Bambara, I'm gonna get into the Bambara. I'm gonna get into a lot of different people, but this is the questions that Black people need to ask themselves. Traditionally, we look at the European as he is the devil, right? And he doesn't get off the hook, but we don't look at the people that were complicit in the transatlantic slave trade, which were African tribes and kingdoms on the West Coast.
It was the Africans who did it. And before the Europeans even landed here, slavery was already in the system.
He said before the Europeans got here, slavery was already existing. It was already going on in Africa. And a lot of people use that as a scapegoat to get out of the argument of, slave masters and people selling us into slavery. They say, well, it existed all over the world for, hundreds of centuries. Slavery has existed. It's not nothing new. Of course, it's not nothing new. There's a big distinction. Although the umbrella term is called slavery, there is a big distinction between being a servant in servitude and chattel slavery, what Black people went through in the transatlantic slave trade, going to the West Indies and going to different parts of America.
It was slaves that worked in the palaces for the kings.
There's slaves that worked in the palaces for the kings that, had jobs and things. And this
it was more, even at that time, than just money.
This is that was just a view that a lot of African Americans went and saw when they in 2019 with the return to Ghana. You got pictures of Steve Harvey and different people crying and just taking it all in of the last thing that their ancestors saw before they got on those ships to America. This brother right here is just saying he thought it was about money.
It had to be just something else that drove them to just kill these people.
Yeah, why brutalize them like that?
Why brutalize? But then again, I guess that's justification on rationalization.
So what this person just said right here, or what the subtitle is saying of the person that made this video, is that what they didn't say is that the Africans had a market for the surplus slaves that they had captured that didn't get sold. What they would do is they would sacrifice them. This is documented. They would sacrifice kings. If you was nobility from one of these ethnicities that they had conquered, and you was noble, you was a king, a prince, or something, what they would do is they would cannibalize you. They would eat you. This is 100% facts. You can look it up yourself.
If you brutalize it, then you have to say to yourself, there's no way we as a Christian people could brutalize other humans, so they can't be humans.
But did it surprise you when you found out that Africans were involved as well as middlemen?
The thing, I knew that Africans were involved. I didn't know the extent to what they were involved. And I also didn't know that once they found out what was going on here, and I know that they had to know what was going on here,
right?
That they stayed a willing participant in it.
Right.
That's the crazy part of it.
Right. So the normal argument is that the Africans that sold these Black people to Europeans didn't know, they didn't understand what it was like for these people when they got to America and how they were treated and the brutality. They didn't know that. They didn't know how they were being treated, at the prisons and at the slave ports. So that's the common excuse that you hear, is that they didn't know when they were selling these people. They didn't know the extent. Of course they knew, right? And when they found out, they kept doing it. It's not like they felt sorry for the people they were selling to another people. That's why I said it before, and I asked that question again. Would you sell, like, who was being sold? Was it the neighbor? Was it their grandparents? Was it their cousins, their aunties, or something? Who were they selling if they were selling their family? Like, it doesn't even make sense. They were selling a people who are not their people. Although they're dark-skinned people, they were just selling people who were rivals, people that didn't have the same culture as them, didn't worship the same gods as them, They were selling people that was different from them. They wasn't selling their own people, because if they did, why wouldn't they feel bad if they found out how Europeans were treating us? Right? I mean, it's just common sense.
I think I was surprised and hurt and angry and everything because, these were people that, you know, I sort of had a fantasy about them and as our ancestors, and your ancestors don't sell you.
The sister just said it. She she had a fantasy of us, them being our people, and then she thought, you know what? Your people don't sell you. Your people don't sell you. But she said it was a fantasy to believe that these are my ancestors. But you don't sell your people.
So that fantasy was sort of blown away, and I was
You said that
yeah,
fantasy
I
was
had a
blown away.
whole range of.
This isn't my first visit to a slave castle, but it is the first time I've heard a tour guide be so explicit about the role of the Africans. Most of us come here to beat up on the Europeans, and God knows they deserve it. I'm actually surprised at how honest he was.
You said he's surprised at how honest the African tour guide was by telling them the truth, by telling them what really happened. And we sitting over here in America gamed up. We're sitting up in America Europeanized. We Negropeans. We're gamed up off of the education system that says that if you just came from Africa, well, then you're African. Y'all all the same because y'all dark-skinned people. Listen, when it comes to dark-skinned people, everybody from antiquity, from ancient times, all nations was dark-skinned, right? Everybody was dark. That's not nothing to even argue. There's many dark-skinned people. That doesn't make you the same people. At no time were people unified because they were dark, because they were black. People separated themselves by nation and nationality.
The Ashanti sold the Europeans prisoners of war and their own criminals. A large part of their wealth and glory was based on slavery.
You hear
I
that?
wanted to know if they had any regrets. So I asked the king's son, Ohiniba Adewese Poku.
The whole slavery episode was an unfortunate era in the history of Africa, and for that matter, of Ashanti. One would say it depleted the human resources of the empire. What perhaps the empire could have achieved, was lost through this trade. So much as we, as I said, do regret, that era in our history. Perhaps it was a sign of the times, and we couldn't have done otherwise.
He said, as much as they regret that era of them selling slaves, uh, it probably was just a sign of the times, and it wasn't much else they could do.
But do you think the Africans understood how horrible the transatlantic slave trade was?
This is that
No,
thing
no,
again.
no. I mean, no, I don't think they knew. I mean, if they had known, known about the horrible stories that these our brothers and sisters were going through when they were being transported, not only from our coast, but through the transatlantic, through Goree, and then the transatlantic route to the States. I don't think they would have continued doing it. I mean,
So that question pops up again. He said that he don't think that if they would have knew about the brutality of slavery, they would have continued doing it, right? But they continued doing it though.
besides, there was no means of knowing, the
And now he says there was no means
brutalities
of
that
knowing. They couldn't have known.
underwent.
It's not surprising that he should want to explain away this nightmare in our history. The truth is, like everyone else in this business, the Ashanti were motivated by profit. At last, I made it into Benin, the modern name of Dahomey. Stories about human sacrifice and barbarism here were favorite travelers' tales in the 18th century. Traders were far more fearful of Dahomey's kings than they were of Ashanti's.
The kings of Dahomey traded a lot of slaves. Abomey has traded, from the figures we know now, not far from 1 million people.
Just from Abomey alone.
Just from Abomey alone.
1 million
and
people.
You have more from the neighboring kingdoms, Savi Kingdom, for instance, Port Novo Kingdom, etc., etc.
All the way down to Lagos in Nigeria.
Yes, all the way to Lagos in Nigeria. And the cannons you can see here are the sign of the slave trade, because they would buy a cannon against 25 gentlemen.
So those cannons were worth 25 slaves. So the cannons laying around are a symbol of the slavery or the slave trade. And this is also a biblical prophecy that Israelites would be sold for guns and wine.
Do the citizens of Benin today, through the schools or publicly, talk about this history of the slave trade when the people of Dahomey sold other black people to the white man and then shipped them to the New World?
We do not talk much about slave trade, slavery, because for most of Beninese people, 300 years back is a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Those who have been to school know about slave trade, know about what happened to their brothers sold to the New World. And a few months back, we had the bicentenary of the death of King Agonglo. And Agonglo was said to be one of the kings who tried to stop slave trade. But of course, he did not succeed.
But he must have known how bad it was.
Yes, he knew. They knew how bad it was. That was why they didn't treat their own people.
I don't know if y'all caught that. He said they knew how bad it was, and that is why they did not trade their own people. I'm gonna play it again for you.
Slave trade. But of course, he did not succeed.
But he must have known how bad it was.
Yes, he knew. They knew how bad it was. That was why they didn't treat their own people. And Agonglo was said that was because he did. That was why they didn't treat their own people. They would treat people from the wars and battles they did all around the country.
So there you have it again. All black people are not the same. I don't know why you niggas can't get this through your head. All black people ain't the same. You're not Egyptian. You're not from Dahomey. You're not Wakandan. You're not none of those things. If they did this to you, if they put you in shackles and yokes of wood around your neck and marched you out to the shore to Europeans to sell you into the slave trade, they did not sell their own people. They knew how brutal it was. They didn't sell their own loved ones. They didn't sell the people they grew up with. They did not sell their own people, their own cultural ethnic group. They didn't sell them. And it's right here. And this is from Africans. These are from people from West Africa telling you, historians telling you what happened. They didn't sell their own people. And I said it in that video. There's definitely ignorance on the African American side. I keep saying African American, but it's definitely ignorance on this side. On this side of the pond is definitely ignorance and a lack of knowledge when it comes to our history. And it's also ignorance when it comes to Africans. A lot of Africans don't know their history either. You heard him say that was like 200-300 years ago. And so most of the Dahomians, they don't really, go back that far and think about that. But the ones that go to school, they do know their history. And so the point is a lot of misinformation, and black people are reaching and striving and trying to find their identity and doing DNA tests and doing this, except looking at the historical record, except looking at what actually happened, right? And except snapping up out of the Europeanized mindset, the Africanized mindset that got us thinking like, oh, we're black, we're all the same. Let's just chop it up at that. We came from the motherland and we're black and we're all the same. When in reality, there's so many different ethnic groups. There's more than 52, 53 countries in Africa right now. There's so many different groups of people on such a large continent that you can't think that they're the same people. There is no, no union of ancient cultures and black races that came together because they were black. They probably had things in common that they should ally together for, but they didn't come together just because they were black. This whole idea of being black and being unified is a new idea. And it's an westernized, it's something we learned in the West. It's something that we learned in America, that we got this global black unity when that doesn't exist, and it has never existed. Different black nations didn't get along with each other. They probably made treaties with each other. They probably did business with each other, but they were always separate, and they always fought and warred against each other. And nothing is new right now. But we're under this spell, and I say this Europeanized spell in America, this Christian spell that we are the world. All black people are the same. It just never happened. And I just showed you some proof right here. So let me know what you think about this video. Give me your thoughts. Give me your opinions. If you got anything that's beneficial to the conversation, put it in the comments. And with that, this is Black Authentic Truth.